Hello everyone, today we are going through the second part of the building automated tests for your web apps, specifically your Webflow web apps. Last stream we talked about how to implement unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests with some testing automations. And in this particular case, we're using Playwright as a tool to implement the tests. So if you're building some kind of, custom logic on your Webflow apps, or you're building some other web app, it doesn't matter if it's Webflow or not, and you're interested in knowing how to implement automated tests so you don't slip any bugs in production, or you don't, ship some things that you didn't know that were behaving differently than you expected, this is your stream, this is your video. So stay here and let's just jump right into it. Okay, cool. So on the first stream, what we did was we went through the definition of what's a unit test, what's an integration test, and what's a end-to-end test. And then we went ahead and created a new repository following just the Get Started guide from Playwright. So you can always find it in playwright.dev. You go to Get Started and you can see here the full documentation about how to install it and how to run the first tests, etc. So we did that. We installed Playwright in this new repository, and then we started creating a few examples. We created an example to test a single function, which would be a unit test. In this case, we created this function that I know it's very complex, that it's called add numbers. So we tested that this function of adding two numbers was working correctly. That's a unit test. Then we created an example of an integration test, which would be several functions working together. And in this case, we created a calculator that calculates the BMI of a person based on some inputs. And this calculation function essentially takes kilograms and centimeters and then calls other functions to make sure that the data is properly prepared for this for the output, and then it divides the numbers. So that would be the example of the integration test, also run here in Playwright. And the last thing that we did was we took this calculation, this BMI calculator, and we created a web app in Wisp, which it's right in here. That's essentially just a form that has a weight input, a height input, and then just a submit button. So when we submit the form, it does the calculations of the BMI for us. And essentially then we went ahead and implemented an end-to-end test. And the end-to-end test essentially goes to the website, interacts with the web app, and then expects something to happen. And this is actually the strength of Playwright, because Playwright spins up a browser for us and then just does any task that we define. He does it for us and checks if the output was the expected one. So that's very powerful. And I think that many people just with that first stream can already start building a lot of automations that can help them ship safe solutions into production. Now, today, I want to, go ahead and dive a bit more into advanced topics. The first thing that I wanted to discuss today is that Playwright, it's not only meant for consuming it as a CLI or as a library here on your project, it also has a VS Code extension. And that VS Code extension is actually pretty cool. So I wanted to share with you. You can find, if you come to the docs and you try to look for VS Code extension, you will find it. But essentially, it's just an extension that you can go ahead inside VS Code in your extensions panel, and you can find it and install it. I already have it installed here, so I'm going to skip the whole installing part. And this is the extension that I'm talking about, okay? Playwright test for VS Code. So if you install this, it gives us a few goodies that are pretty handy when you're both writing the tests and also trying to execute the tests while you're here developing inside VS Code. So let me just show you. Once you install this, what you're going to see is this icon in here, all testing. And you can just click on it. And one of the things that will happen automatically is that if you have Playwright in your project, and in my case here, I do have Playwright. I have a folder called tests. And inside this folder called tests, I have a test file called example.spec.ts. And inside this test file, I have three tests. I have add numbers, BMI outputs, and then calculator works fine. So without doing anything, just by having installed the extension, I can see all of my tests right away in here. And the good thing is that I can click on play on any of these, which is cool, because then I can just go ahead and see, hey, I want to test this, adds numbers correctly. So let's just do it. Let's just play it in here. And this is going to run it for us. And it's going to, you can see how it opens this terminal in here, that it shows me the tests, and it shows me if it went right or if it went wrong. And also, I think that we can even see some more info if instead of just playing it, we play it in debug mode. Because when we do this, now it opens the browser, I believe. And if something fails, it stops it and it shows me, hey, it's failing at this specific point. Cool. But I think actually let's make it more visual, because there are some more options down here. One option is show browser. The other option is show trace viewer. Let's just click on show browser. Let's do it again. Actually, in this case, it's not going to show any browsers because there's no browser to be opened. But let's run these calculator works fine, because this test, it's an end-to-end test, and it needs a browser because it goes to a website and then it interacts with the site. So let's do this one, and let's see 1 second if it works fine and it opens a browser. It does. Cool. And you can see how things passed. So this is very cool because I can see the bot opening the browser, doing the things for me, and then spitting out the output, which is nice. I think that also shows trace viewer. I think this is more for, actually, let's try it 1 second. Show trace viewer, I think that it's the full UI. Yeah, it's the full UI that is going to show me the exact steps that the browser is taking. Yeah, you can see here by screenshots, you can see how it's loading the site, and then it's writing inside. Let me zoom in for a sec. It's writing inside the inputs in here. Hold on. How can I scroll? Yeah, in here. Correct. So you can see how essentially it's doing all of these for us, and then it's checking for the result, which is passed. Okay. So this extension is pretty cool. It's very cool. It's very helpful. But the coolest thing of the extension, it's not only being able to run the tests from here, it's actually that we can make it write the test for us. Okay. So if you check on the options in here, you're going to see a few options, and let's click on this record new. When we do this, what's going to happen is now I have a new test file in here. You can see how it's telling me that it's recording, and it has opened a browser window that I'm going to put as the same size from the other windows. Yeah, cool. So it has opened this browser window, and now anything that I do manually here in this browser, it's going to be recorded by Playwright, and it's going to be automatically written for me in here. I don't have to write anything. Playwright is just going to follow my steps and record every single action that I do. So imagine that, for example, I want to do all of these that we did here. So I want to go to the weight input and fill it 85, height input, fill it 180, and then click on the submit button, and then that's it. So let's do this. I'm going to visit this site. Let's visit this, and let's see if it's recording. Now it's recording. See how I just visited the site and I already wrote this in here? Let's go and focus the weight input. And you can see how it focused the weight input for me. So it wrote this line for me saying that I focused that specific input. And I'm going to just put 85. I'm going to focus the height, 180, and I'm going to click on calculate. Nice. Okay, so here is the output, and you can see how essentially it's not very optimal. You can see because it essentially repeats a lot the same code, but it's still doing this for me, which is cool, right? It's going to the side, it's clicking on the weight input, it's filling the weight input, it's clicking on the height input, it's filling the height input, and then it's submitting the form. Nice. So if you feel lazy to write the tests, remember that with the VS Code extension, you can always have the extension write the test for you. The only thing that it's missing that you will have to write anyways is writing the actual assertions, what's expected from these tests. Because in here, all we did was write the actions that the browser should be doing. Click on this, fill that, submit that. But then it's up to us to write what we are expecting from it. So in this case, I would have to still do like this, like expect result element. Obviously, we have to identify the result element, etc. Okay, but it's up to you to write the assertions. It's up to you to define what a test should be looking for. Cool. Okay, so that's one cool thing. Let me close this and let's move on because I have a lot of things to show you today. Cool. So one of the things that I did not explain the previous stream, it's how Playwright treats isolation. Let me explain. Right now, it's fine because we just have one single test, right? But imagine that you want to have a lot of tests because in your application, you need to test many things. Every single test that you have in here, so right now, let me remove this test not only, every single test that you define in here, it's completely isolated. And you probably are wondering, like, what does that mean? It means that in whatever you do inside here, it's not going to affect other tests. Let me put an example. Imagine that we have this first test that opened the site and then it located the inputs, it filled the inputs and then submitted the form, right? And then imagine that you want to have another test that tests what happens afterwards. So once the form is submitted, there are some things that are happening. For example, the Webflow by default shows this thank you message. So imagine that you want to check if the thank you message is visible. So maybe you would do another test and do something like thank you message is visible, right? And you would write the test here. One thing that you cannot expect to happen is think, okay, the previous test was already did this, which means that here I can assume that the thank you message should be visible because the form was submitted, as you can see here. But that's a wrong assumption. And the reason is because inside each test, the browser clears up. Everything is cleared up. Whatever is happening inside this test, it's going to happen in a fresh new browser tab. There are no shared cookies. There are no shared local stage variables. There are no shared sessions. There are no shared state in the DOM. There's nothing like that. Every single test, it's completely isolated, like if it was a different machine. Which means that if you need to do something that happens after something else, you have to specify all of that inside a single test. Okay, it might sound cumbersome, like, okay, I'm having to rewrite the same things again and again, but it's actually for the good because you know for sure that inside a test, you're starting fresh without any side effects. There's nothing else that could be, giving you false readings of these tests because you're starting fresh from scratch. This brings me to the next topic, which is hooks. Okay, in Playwright, there are hooks. Let me show you just for a second. I'm going to go to one of the hooks that is before each hook. But essentially, we can define a few hooks to run on every test in specific life cycles. So, for example, we have a after all. After all, after each, before all, before each, and that's it, okay? So essentially, imagine that, for example, in each test, we want to be visiting this site, right? So you could do another test in here, and you could do, the same, essentially visiting this, but then in here, maybe you would put a different logic, different testing logic, whatever, okay? But, when you're doing this many times, it starts to get a bit repetitive. So instead of slapping some logic inside each test, you could go ahead and just say, test before each. And then inside this before each, we could say, hey, before you start any test, I want you to go to this page in here, right? And that's it. Now we could remove this completely. We could remove this completely because we know that before each test starts, it's going to visit this site for me and it's going to check to make sure that we are on that page before running any other logic in here. In this particular case, I don't want to do this because I have some tests that don't rely on this page in here, but it's very convenient, especially when you're just doing end-to-end tests. It's very, very convenient. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to jump into API testing because that's another big thing, right? Remember that we are testing web applications. And one thing that probably you want to be testing, it's your server too. You can test the front end. You can do a full end-to-end test and just make the front end make the calls. Or maybe you want to test directly your backend, your server, right? So you can do this totally also here in Playwright. So imagine that we have an API and I'm going to use JSON placeholder as an example. This JSON placeholder is just a fake API. This fake API, we want to test it. Imagine that, I'm building a web app and I want to make sure that each single endpoint of my web app, it's also returning what I'm expecting from it. So I'm going to build a test. So imagine that, for example, I want to get a resource, which would be essentially just calling this endpoint. This, you can do it by doing, let's just go to guys. I want to show you exactly where you can find the docs for this. But you can find it in API testing inside the Playwright docs. We can write tests for API calls and essentially just use the request method, the request object that's provided by Playwright. So let's imagine that we want to test post endpoint returns the correct data. Okay, and this is going to be an async function, and from here we're going to get the request object. So what we can do is say, hey, result, we want to request, and we have all the options here to make any kind of request. We can make a delete, dispose, fetch, get, head, patch, post, put, and then storage state, which actually I don't know what it is. But in this particular case, we want to do a get. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a get with this API endpoint. And now all we have to do is just expect something to be something else, right? So we could do expect, hold on, a result dot, I think it's the data, status, body, headers, JSON. I think it's the JSON. So we would do data equals await result.json, I believe. And now we could say, hey, expect the data to be equal to something. So let's just try let's see what this endpoint returns. This endpoint, it's a fake endpoint. Remember, it's just a fake API. It returns a user ID, an ID, a title, and a body. So I can just gonna copy and paste this and put it in here. And by doing this, I'm already just mocking, not mocking, but I'm testing my own server endpoint. I'm grabbing this and I'm getting the data, and then I'm expecting that data to be equal to something. So let's just try it. Let's just do test only. And actually, let's use the extension. So now that we have this in here, we can play it, run the test. And if we did it right, it should correctly pass the test. Nice. I'm not going to show the browser for now. Cool. But if we change this, imagine that now you are updating your server, something changes. And I'm just going to mock this being wrong. I'm going to change the user ID. But now that this assertion, this expectancy is not what's the real output, this should fail the test. So let's try it again. And now this is failing because it's saying, hey, the data that you were expecting was supposed to be user ID 2, but you're getting user ID 1. So you can see now how you can really ensure that every single part of your web application is working fine. not only the front end, but also the back end. Okay, so let's move on. There are more things that I want to share. Evaluating JS. That's a good one. So let's see what happens if we do this. I'm gonna get rid of these tests, okay? Let's see what happens if we do, I don't know. Let's imagine that for any reason you are testing a JavaScript library, okay? Let's just imagine this. Yeah, imagine that you're building some open source library and you wanna test the public JavaScript API of that public source library. Okay, so I'm gonna do, let's use the, because obviously I don't have a JavaScript library right now, but we could just simulate it by, how about we run some jQuery? Because there's actually jQuery loaded in here by Webflow. Webflow adds jQuery. So let's imagine that we want to test if the JavaScript API from jQuery works fine, right? So in here, let's say jQuery works fine, like that. Okay. So we would go to the site and, oops, this should be async. We would go to the site and then we would do, for example, like, I don't know, CSS class, add class. So we can do add class. So let's do that. Add class. Yeah, nice. Okay. So imagine that we want to test if the add class from jQuery works fine. Okay. And I'm going to do it all with this input because it's already defined. So first I'm going to get this wait input in here. And now what I want to do is run the add class method using from jQuery, and then check if the class was added to the input. Okay. In this particular case, you need to run JavaScript inside this page, inside the browser instance that was created for this specific test. So the first thing that you would guess is, okay, so I'm going to do this, right? I think that's something, well, just run the jQuery. So you would do something like da, 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 and then let's use data test ID equals to wait input, and actually need to get rid of this because otherwise it's kind of like that. And then add class test, right? That's what you would expect to be able to do, to just interact directly with the DOM inside here. But the thing is that you cannot do this. The reason why you cannot do this is because this scope in here, does not have access to the window object. So right now, any logic that you're writing inside this function scope, it's not interacting directly with the browser that it's being instantiated for this test. Instead of doing that, what you have to do is page evaluate in here. And when doing this page evaluate, you're saying, hey, I want to run some JavaScript inside the page that we've loaded. Okay, like that. And now that we have done this, now this should work fine. So let's do now this and do expect wait input, actually wait input to have class, I think, test, like that. Okay, and now this should work fine, I think. Hold on, I think that maybe this is async. I think that we have to wait for it, like that. So let's try it. Let's go to here, tests, and let's run this jQuery. Works fine. And if we did it right, we did not. Okay. What failed? Okay. First of all, I'm going to try to run this in here. Is it adding the test class? Yep. So maybe we have to specify the window. Let me try it again. Yeah. It should work. Page evaluate and then the window jQuery at class test. It should do it. Oh, you know why? Because this is supposed to be a regex. Hold on. It's supposed to be a regex. So when you're checking for a class, either you pass the whole thing, so not only the test class, but you have to pass the whole class object. So you would have the whole class attribute. So you would have to check for I just messed this up. Hold on. W input, and then the test class. But instead, I just want to check for the test class to be present. That's why I need to use a regex. If we did it right now, fail again. Maybe because jQuery is still not loaded. Let me see. No, that should not be the case. I'm gonna console log this for a second. I want to see if jQuery is working correctly. Let's debug this. Oh, hold on. Oh, wait. Come on. I was not waiting for this. Okay, so stupid mistakes, always try to await things, because anytime that you're checking for something, it's completely asynchronous. That's the main reason, okay? I apologize for this. But essentially, when you're evaluating things and when you're expecting things, you have to wait for it because it's asynchronous. So I was missing this awaiting here. Okay, great. Crisis resolved. Let me jump into one last thing that I wanted to bring up for sure today, which is CI. Because so far, we've been running all these tests here locally. But remember that the main reason why we want to have this in place is to avoid shipping any code that it's breaking our application to production. So we want to automatically run this without us to do it manually. We want at some point between the moment that I finish writing my custom code to the moment that I send that custom code to production, I want to have a step in the middle where it's automatically checking that all the tests are passing, because if some test is failing, I don't want to ship that code to production. I want to stop it right there. So I want to show you how you can easily put this into CI. Okay, cool. So we want to run all these tests anytime that we push some code into production. How do we do it? Well, if you created the Playwright project by using the Get Started guide and you did this npm init Playwright, well, in my case, pm create Playwright, the good thing is that it will create already a GitHub action for us. This is the definition of a GitHub action. And a GitHub action is just a few directives that we give to GitHub. So anytime that we do something, GitHub will run those jobs for us. And in this particular case, you can see how it's saying, hey, anytime that we push some code into main or master, or anytime that we open a pull request against main or master, I want you to run this job. This job is called test. it has some timeout, it runs on Ubuntu, so on a Linux machine, and then it has a bunch of steps. And the steps are check out the repo, so check out the code base, set up node. In this case, it's setting up the node version 18, install the dependencies, so just npm install, pnpm install Playwright browsers, pnpm exec Playwright install with dependencies, and then run the Playwright tests, pnpm exec Playwright test. And that's it. That's it. So we really don't need to do it by ourselves. We could totally write this by hand, but why do it if Playwright did it for us? So this means that because this is a repository, I'm gonna because this is a Git repository, all I need to do is just move it to GitHub, and that's it. So let's do it. Right now, I'm just living on my local machine, but I'm gonna init this as a Git repository. So I'm gonna say git init, and now this whole folder, you can see how now it's converted to a Git repository. And because I use GitHub Desktop, this is pretty easy for me. And then I'm gonna add an existing repository, and I'm gonna choose the path, which in this case, I believe that it's stream Playwright, I think. Hold on, stream Playwright. Yeah. Add repository, nice. And I'm gonna do first commit. And I'm gonna commit this to master. And I'm gonna publish this repository, and it will go into my own stream Playwright, into my own GitHub account. Cool. Okay, so now that we've published this as a GitHub repository, let's go to GitHub. Let's view this in GitHub. We can see the first commit. All of this is living in here. And you can see this yellow button in here, this yellow circle, that it's essentially saying, hey, something is running in CI. So let's click in here, and we can see how there is an action called Playwright tests that is running. Nice. So we can see how it's setting up the job, it's installing the dependencies, and it's installing the Playwright browsers for us. Nice. And after it's done installing the browsers, it's going to run the tests for us. Nice. So the good thing of this is that now, imagine that we want to do some stuff. You want to change something. We would create new brands, and we would say, new feature. Nice. Okay. And inside this new feature, I'm just going to create a new function. Let's just make something quick. And I'm going to say export const new feature. And this new feature, it's just going to return true. Okay. It's a very silly function, but it's just for the sake of the example. Okay, great. And then in here, I'm actually going to get rid of this. I don't want it. Inside here, I'm going to create a new test that will be called new feature is working fine. And essentially, I want this result to be true, like that, okay? But actually, let's make it fail first. So I know now that this test is going to fail because this new feature function is returning false, but I'm expecting it to be true. So something, I did something wrong in my code, right? Something is not right. So I am going to now open this pull request, feed new feature. I'm going to commit this code, and I'm going to create a pull request. So let's create a pull request against master. Let's open it. And now, because in the GitHub action, we have to find that this test job should run on every pull request against main or master. This means that now you can see how this is running here. Nice. And the good thing is that now, before merging this pull request, I can wait. And I can see first if this passes or fails, which is my safe mechanism to make sure that I'm not shipping anything into master or into main that it's wrong, that it's failing. So I'm going to wait until this is running, and you will see how it fails, obviously, because it's going to find a false result when it's expecting it to be true. But let's just wait. So let's see how this is going. Let's check the details. Oh, cool. So you can see how we actually failed the tests. So the tests failed. And now see how this, it's telling me, hey, all the checks in here failed. This Playwright test step, this job failed, which is telling me, hey, you should not be merging this. And actually, there's even safer mechanisms in GitHub where you can define in your organization settings some rules to say, hey, if you have some tests that are not passing in a pull request, then don't allow me to merge that pull request, because it means that it has something that is wrong and it should not be shipped into production. So now I'm going to change this. I'm going to go ahead and fix the logic. So I can say fix no feature result, like this. And because I'm fixing this, now it's going to run again the test, because anytime that I push a commit in here, it should be running the test again. Yep. And now the next time it's going to pass it. Okay, cool. So now you can see how everything is passing. It's giving me green check marks and it's saying, hey, you are good to merge this. You are now good to go. So all good. You can delete the branch. We can move into master. We now know for sure that that code that was shipped into production was completely safe because it was passing all my tests. Great. Okay, that's it for today. Now you know how the whole workflow works between the moment that you start writing the features for your application, you define the tests, and then you ship that features into production. You can totally make sure that every single thing that you're shipping into production, it's completely safe, that it's working as you are expecting. So if you like this, please leave a like, leave a comment, and we'll see you in the next stream. Thank you, everyone. See you.